My only paranormal experience, a little girl, a storm, and a poltergeist. This entire story sounds so ridiculous and cliche that it's really hard to believe, even for me. Stuff that I would relate to a cliche horror movie, but this was my first and only paranormal experience, that I remember at least. It was just me by myself. I wouldn't believe that it actually happened, just a dream or something like that. But to experience it with my best friend at the time made it much more real. When I was around 16 years old, I'm 27 now, at a friend's house on the net late at night, the usual stuff that was popular at the time to 16-year-olds, MySpace, E-bombs, Break, etc. Suddenly, we both heard a little girl singing loudly. Our first instinct was to find the tab that the music was coming from on the computer, as a lot of websites back then like to have auto-playing music when you visit them. Going through all the tabs, we couldn't find what was playing, so turned the speakers off instead to get rid of it, but the singing carried on. That freaked us a little, but what made it worse was immediately after this, the front door of the house opened with some force, which we thought we locked it, and on what before was a calm, dry night, it was suddenly raining heavily and very, very windy. The singing stopped when the door opened. We were both freaked out, jumped up to close and lock the front door, turned the PC off, and went to bed to try to forget it. Waking up the next morning and mentioning it to my friend's mom, her response was simply along the lines of, "Oh, I've met her before. There is a spirit of a little girl living here." It's also worth noting that we thought maybe someone was playing a trick on us. My friend's parents were out of the evening, so we thought that they may have come home to freak us out, but that would be quite elaborate, especially the storm part. Plus, there is an outside light that turns on when someone walks up to the front door, which didn't come on. What makes this whole thing even weirder and possibly more cliche is that his house is on an estate known as Burnt Hill in the east of England, apparently named that because it was a site used to burn witches years ago, though I haven't any proof of that. I know how ridiculous that all sounds, so cliche, but it happened and it freaked us both out. Safe to say I believe in paranormal now, though I never had any more experiences. My visit to Union Cemetery, Easton CT. Since I got so many comments and such for my last post, I thought I would share my experience at another location I visited. I went on a sort of mini road trip with my best friend for my birthday last weekend to visit some haunted and abandoned places that I've dreamed of visiting for a long, long time. I'm totally one of those weird chicks that loves hanging out in cemeteries and stuff like that. Union is a really famous haunted location. Some say it's the most haunted location in the US. It is best known for its resident ghost, the White Lady, who wanders the cemetery dressed in all white with long black hair. I was hoping to see her, but not really expecting anything. My friend and I wandered the cemetery. There sadly was a lot of broken and knocked down tombstones, which infuriated me. One in particular really caught my attention, though. It was knocked on the ground, with a bunch of pennies on top of it. I thought it was very strange, and it was the only one with pennies on top of it. It had been a while since I've read anything about the location. I was more focused on actually finding it, so my friend turned to trusty Google to see if we could find the identity of the White Lady. Lo and behold, the grave with the pennies on it was the grave most people believed to be her. Her name was Harriet R. Seeley. She died from complications in childbirth and lost her newborn son as well. We tried some EVP and videos, but it was a windy day and nothing really came of it. I did have an interesting experience, however. I took pictures using my new camera. I barely used it that day, and I'm sure it still had full battery. I also had a complete charge before I left the house. Now, as I walked through the cemetery, my battery was draining. Within 15 minutes of this, of just taking a small amount of photos, my battery drained from half to nothing. Interestingly enough, I was standing before Mrs. Seeley's grave when the camera died, right after I had tried asking for a sign of her presence. I normally would deduct something like this as a coincidence, but I couldn't come up with any rational explanation. I sadly didn't see any apparitions or mists, and I did not catch any spirit photos. I did randomly get a nauseous and sick feeling when standing in front of a few graves. I can't remember which ones. I'm planning to go back there at night sometime. I'm really hoping soon, even if I just stand before the gate. Technically, you aren't allowed to go in after dark. Bear encounter or something else? Gotta be honest, with anyone who reads this, I've never encountered anything paranormal or extremely out of the ordinary in terms of ghosts, spirits, or Bigfoot, etc. However, this certain encounter has baffled me ever since I left Lockett Meadow, which, for anyone who isn't familiar with the location, is located in Flagstaff, Arizona. Right off the bat, I'm not sure if what I encountered was just a bear or something else. To begin, it started like any other camping trip, well, in my experience. Planned but unplanned. I was with my best friend, and we decided to pack up his family's van and set out to Flagstaff. We took my dog, whom I shared with my girlfriend at the time, Benji, and his dog, Monty, both shepherdors, and traveled to Lockett Meadow. Our first venture in the night, we jammed and drank some vodka. Nothing too crazy, but at the end, we were getting tired, so we decided to crash in our tent. Keep in mind, this was probably like 1 or 2 in the morning when we decided to sleep, and the tent wasn't too big nor was it too small. Enough room for us two and the 2 dogs. I'm on one side with my dogs, who's on the right side of my legs, bundled up in the corner of the tent by my feet, and same for my friend and his dog, but bundled up on the left side of his feet. Now that you sort of have an image of how we're laid out, let's get to the real reason why I'm writing and you're reading. I wake up in the middle of the night to an unsettling push on my head from outside the tent. I open my eyes and I can see and feel a big dark snout-like figure through the tent, pushing its face into my face with no sniffles or breathing. My thought at that exact moment is that it could have been a black bear or an elk or something like that. I tilt my head down and cover my mouth and see my dog Benji looking up at me with fear and not moving a muscle. This snout-like bear thing continues to bury itself through the tent, observing my body and Benji's, my dog. This figure hovering itself over the tent was halfway in and tormented me with fear. I wanted to hit my friend to wake him up, but I didn't want to startle whatever it was outside. This snout-like object was maybe about more than 1 foot in length, burying itself on our tent. After it stopped digging in, I can hear it walking around our tent. I'm thinking that it's looking or smelling for food, and I was scared knowing that we were probably it. I nearly strangled my face with a sleeping bag and tried to sleep, and somehow it worked. This all happened in less than a minute, and next thing you know, I wake up to my friend unzipping the tent and pissed right outside. I rise and ask them if there's usual bear encounters out where we camped, and the chances of encountering one. Quickly I followed up with my story, and he immediately dismissed it, and that it was very unlikely we would get one at our camp. We looked together around the tent and yards away to find any tracks at all. Keep in mind, there was no one else at this campsite, let alone for miles and miles outside of Lockett Meadow. We didn't find any tracks, no bustling with our things we left outside, no contact with our trash that we have left hanging on a tree, no branches or grass pressed with any sort of pressure, nothing. He told me it could have been a dream. It could have been a black bear, but he wasn't buying my story. I know what I've seen and felt, internally and externally. I don't know if there is anyone who had a similar experience, or something to add that it could have been a bear. It would really put me at ease. Other than that, the anomalies doesn't stop there. Part 2. After Lockett Meadow, we hit Wet Beaver Creek. The second portion starts right at late night, and at one point, we're hotboxing our tent, and all of a sudden we hear strange noises coming outside. We shut up quickly. I hear the same rustling I heard at Lockett Meadow, walking around our campsite. We try to conclude what the fuck is out there, and though the seams of the tent where we can see our fire, because we never leave it unattended, then out of nowhere something huge must have fallen in or tripped over the fire, because it's now out and we witness this all happening faintly through the tent cover. We freak and whisper to each other that it's no animal nor human possibly. A few minutes goes by and we get out to investigate. Observe. Keep in mind, it's windy, even though there is some dead air, and again, No tracks, no prints, nothing. We didn't speak anything of it, and slept without a word. Part 3. The next day we hiked Sedona, in between Oak Creek and Slide Rock, and we're by the creek chilling on some red rocks. All of a sudden, a huge rock is thrown from above us into the stream. This rock was bigger than softball, maybe half the size of a volleyball, if even. We immediately yell above with, "Hey, what the fuck?" and "Fuck you, asshole!" And no one replied back. We can't even see that far up and over the cliffs, and hear no one running away or any sign of someone near above us. After this encounter, my friend opened up that throughout the trip, he had rocks being thrown at him ever since we started the trip, and I got chills. These strange string of events still confuses me. Was it just fear we gassed up in our heads? With the encounter at Lockett Meadow, our encounter at Wet Beaver Creek, and my friend's countless rock-throwing feud? One thing is for sure, I felt a great depth of fear throughout that trip, and next time something like this happens, the fear won't overcome my curiosity to find answers though. What do you think? Who opened the window at night? Something's definitely evil in our old house. When I was around 9 or 10 years old, my family moved to this 2-story old house that stood on top of a massive rock formation overlooking the bay. We only lived there for a short period of time to accommodate my dad's old job that required him to inspect cargo ships that entered the bay. The house was pretty old, and because kids often let their imagination get the best of them, me and my brother were pretty creeped out by the thought of occupying it. It looked like just one of those old houses in horror films. There was a huge, equally old-looking fig tree standing next to the north wing of the house that creaked and whined as the wind buffeted it. My parents once considered felling it for fear of the wind toppling onto the house, but the locals discouraged them, claiming that the tree was a historical relic, much older than the house itself. It had witnessed the first traveler ship enter the bay centuries ago. My mother was making such a fuss about it, insisting we never enter the kitchen in the north wing on a windy day, and my dad said there was nothing we could do. We hated the house as much as a scared kid hates spending time in a haunted house. We could hear the hustle and bustle of ships passing through echoing in the waters and into our ears whilst we were asleep. Waves crashing against the wall of solid rocks a few meters beneath the house. Not to mention that sometimes sea snakes and other marine critters found their way up into the house to make their nests under the sink, behind the cupboards, or any gap or crack in the walls and floors that could squeeze themselves into. One night my mother found a purple-ringed black sea snake coiling itself around the sink drain pipe in the kitchen. I had never before in my life heard my mother make such an animalistic sound come out of her throat, to my dad's amusement. He said as much as we want to avoid sea snakes and stay away from their potently venomous fangs. They're pretty docile animals and only attack or bite when provoked or accidentally stepped on. One particular morning about living in the house that stands out the most is walking home through a tree line towards its menacing dark silhouette against the sunset when night was approaching. I remember my brother and me thinking it looked like a crooked old man perching on a rock. And there was also the casement window in the living room on the second floor in the west wing of the house that overlooked the bay. There was just something about that window that seemed off to me. It creaked on its hinges as we opened or closed it, and below we could see old, battered, and weathered rough stone steps leading down to a little white sandy beach, like an entrance to another world. For nights the window gave me nightmares. I imagined watching a ghostly troop of dead sailors emerging from the sea, crawling their way up into the house through the window. Yes, I was pretty good at scaring myself as a kid. Anyways, we were wrong about it being haunted, or at least that's what we thought at first. Any weird sound could easily be dismissed as the house settling, or its being more 100 years old. For the first 5 months, nothing particularly strange happened to indicate any form of a haunting. That until my father had to leave town on a business trip for a month, and then strange things started to happen. My brother and I were first to notice, of course, but my mom quickly dismissed it as us kids hating the house for being old and looking creepy. We heard strange bumps at night coming from the west wing, as if somebody was knocking all over the walls. When we told our mother about it in the morning, she would scold us for going too far with our imagination and being afraid of something that was not even there. She believed that it had been the branches of the tree knocking against the walls in the wind that we heard. When we told her that the bumps we heard had come from the living room and the west room, which was practically too far away from the fig tree for its branches to even reach that far off, she would get irritated and ask us to stop. She would not listen to us. Until one morning, it was the fourth day after my dad had left. We had heard more bumps the night before. In the morning, as my mother walked in the living room, she found the window wide open. The wind had blown in and ravaged everything inside. She asked us angrily if we had opened the window and did not believe us when we told her that we were not that brave to enter the room at night, let alone opening the window. When she found the window again wide open the next morning, she became really irritated, thinking that my brother and I were playing a prank on her. We swore to God that we had not opened it. We were too afraid to enter the room alone after sunset. Why would we sneak into it in the middle of the night to open the window just to scare her? She could see how genuinely scared we were. She closed and padlocked the window that night around 7 p.m. and double-checked it before going to bed. We decided that this was all too weird, and it creeped us out, so my mother let us sleep with her in her bedroom. When morning came, my mother woke up to find the window wide open. The padlock was gone, but there were no signs of struggle, as if somebody had opened it from inside the room at night while we were all asleep. We checked all the other windows and doors, and they were all still perfectly locked. I told her it must have been the dead sailors, to which she snapped at me, "Stop this nonsense!" I could see she was already starting to feel really scared. When my dad called, she told him about the window. He said sometimes things like that happen in an old house due to old age. The aging and deterioration foundation and walls are trying to balance and strengthen their position to keep the house from collapsing, thus making it move or settle with such a force. Not to mention the strong wind that buffeted the house all day and night. The result is windows and door opening all by themselves. That makes sense indeed, but he failed to explain the missing padlock. My mother, no matter how uneasy she had already felt being in the house, decided to stick to common sense, and she double padlocked the house at night before we all went to bed. She abruptly woke us up early in the morning to come with her into the living room. I remember her squeezing my shoulder so hard that I flinched. The window was wide open again. The silhouette of the curtain was flapping wildly in the wind against the gray morning sky. The two padlocks were nowhere to be found. She called our dad immediately. She looked so pale. She looked so solemn while telling him what had happened. After a few minutes talking on the phone, suddenly she looked tense. She nodded and turned to look at us. She hanged up and then grabbed our hands. "Get your jacket. We're getting out of here," she said to us. We did not ask her any more questions. We left as quickly as possible and stayed at our friend's house on the outskirts of town for the rest of the week. Turned out, my dad was so sure that the house had a secret passage that we were unaware of, through which somebody must have entered the house. My mother called the police to search the house that morning, and they found nothing. No secret passage, or even any sign of struggle to indicate a break-in. If somebody had indeed broken into the house somehow, they did not steal anything. Even if they had spare keys for access into the house, the doors were still padlocked when we checked them. My mother refused to go back to the house. We stayed at our friend's until my dad returned. We moved out the following months. We never found out how the window opened by itself, or who opened it in the middle of the night. Strange night where a dog ended up leading us home. Just thought I'd share with you guys, for reference. I've always been very paranormally sensitive, seen and heard and felt a lot of strange things, done readings and such for friends and strangers, etc. I was living at my mom's house, and just last summer, my boyfriend and I decided to take a walk to see the sunset. I live out in the country, and usually, when we get bored, we explore woods and go for hikes. This night we walked about 1.5 miles out down our dirt road into a big meadow and kind of onto a sort of cliff that overlooked a steep meadow and was covered by woods on two sides. The kind of meadowy area that gets cleared in a straight path for those giant metal power lines. My boyfriend and I shared a small joint and sat down on the bottom of one of the power lines and were listening to chill music and enjoying the sunset. The sun was already down and the sky was dark at this point now, zoning out when suddenly I felt someone tap hard on my left shoulder urgently. I look over and realize nobody was there. Did you feel that? My boyfriend said no. He is not the type to mess with me, and he too had zoned out staring at the sky. Suddenly, a strange feeling of being watched came over me. I felt uncomfortable, like I had to get up and check out my surroundings. But I had been here many times before. I am not afraid of people or bears or wild dogs. My boyfriend decided he felt too weird, so we got up to leave. On the way back, I felt like we were being followed. Not paranoid. I just had an inkling. Holding hands on our way back, I suddenly felt this huge, tingly energy connecting our bodies between us. I could seriously feel the air between us has charged. We both looked at each other and said, "Holy shit, do you feel that?" I had a feeling I should not let go of his hand. We were about 3/4 mile back when a black dog stepped out into the road ahead of us and sat down, staring at us. This was a neighbor's dog, who I had been encountering for 15 years and never shown the least remote interest in my beckoning to get pet or to greet him. We kept walking, and the dog stayed a consistent 15 feet ahead of us. We approached the dog and tried to shoo him to our neighbor's yard, stopped to pet him, checked his collar to make sure it was the right dog, then brought him to his yard. The dog immediately got in front of us again and continued walking when we did. Every time we stopped, the dog would turn around, sit down, and look at us. Now this is where it gets weird. I've never seen this dog get anywhere near my house before, not even within 1/3 mile, at least even though he was free roam off the side of the creek. But as we walked, the dog stayed 15 feet ahead of us, walked us over the bridge of the creek, and led us back to my house. However, he did not leave once we entered the yard. He walked us up the long driveway and brought us right back to the house, and brought us right to the back door. Funny thing is, I hate my mother's garage. I've had so many weird experiences in there and refuse to use it as the main entrance like everybody else. Without prompting, the dog led us to the back door and we went inside. Now, my dog was indoors. He's a big, fluffy guy that goes nuts when he sees other dogs. He will bark, lunge, try his best to get to a dog if he sees it. If a dog is in our yard, cue a ruckus of howling and barking and jumping at the door. The black dog stood calmly at the back door, and my dog quietly went over, and they just looked at each other for a good 20 minutes. Then the dog left. I've seen this dog many times after this, and he has ignored me and not shown any remote interest in me, like he did that day. Call it paranormal, call it a weird coincidence, but it happened. And I have a feeling this dog was protecting us as we walked home that night. Not sure from what, but it was something the dog needed to do. We have had many long nighttime walks, and this dog has never intervened before. But there you have it. Chill wind blowing when my uncle passed away. A few years ago, my uncle passed away due to cancer. I had gone to visit him earlier in the day, and that night he passed away. I was awake at the time, and a strong gust of chill wind suddenly started blowing in the room through the window. This is very unusual for a tropical climate, and it didn't look like it was going to rain, nor did it rain afterwards. It freaked me out, of course, and the wind eventually died down after a while. The next day we learned that he had passed away during the night, and the timing just seemed really coincidental. To put things into context, the Chinese believe that when someone passes away, they get to see their relatives one last time before going to the afterlife, and well, I got the impression that that was what happened. For some reason, I can't stop thinking about this at the moment. Anyone have similar experiences to share? Sure would be nice if we could find out for sure if there was an afterlife, etc.